Warren Wiersbe, who's a wonderful teacher, he's on the radio quite a bit, you might have heard him, entitled a book on Habakkuk, From Worry to Worship. And Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones wrote another book, also on Habakkuk, called From Fear to Faith. And that's because Habakkuk begins his book, his prophecy, with a complaint. Why does wickedness prevail? But he ends here in chapter 3 with a prayer. And chapter 3 is Habakkuk's prayer. It's one continuous prayer to the Lord. And that prayer basically says, in a nutshell, nevertheless. Pastor Ray was talking about that a month or so ago. Wants to put a sign up over the door, nevertheless. Circumstances notwithstanding, I will trust God. And the fact that Habakkuk's conclusion is a proper one is at least partially evidenced by the fact that this prayer was turned into a psalm. You might notice in the first verse of chapter 3, it says, on Shigionoth, or by Shigionoth, or according to Shigionoth, depending on your translation. Strong's Concordance defines that word as a rambling poem, and meaning that, not that it doesn't have a purpose or an intent, but it doesn't have a real formal structure. And I wondered about that a bit, so I looked up this word. It's also used in Psalm 7, at the beginning of Psalm 7, where the word is a little bit different. It uses the word shaganai, which is really the same word, of David. And what it really means, when it's put to music, is a wildly enthusiastic song of praise. And I think that's cool. Habakkuk has gone through the gamut for our benefit. He's gone from questioning God, despairing about the future of his country and of himself, of course, despairing about the apparent lack of justice, about violence increasing. And when he has this conversation with God, when he ends his conversation, he has now come to the conclusion that God is sovereign. And when he does that, he doesn't just go from an attitude of wretched despair, which he was in at the beginning apparently, and of enthusiastic complaining, to an attitude of complacent acceptance. Oh, okay, well, Lord, if that's the way it is, that's the way it is. No, he goes from this enthusiastic complaining, he does a 180, and ends with this wildly enthusiastic prayer, which was later set to music. This Shigionoth was a wildly enthusiastic song. We find in other verses, the end of verse 3, or the middle of verse 3, the end of verse 13, 19, and others, the word Selah. It's not just the name of a group, but it means a pause for meditation. And in music, where it was used there, it would mean a short musical interlude. So the music would continue to play, but you wouldn't be singing. It would give you time to contemplate and meditate on the words and let the Lord speak to you. So Habakkuk's prayer was so profound, it became maybe the 151st Psalm. It was used as a worship psalm. Verse 2, Habakkuk says, Lord, I have heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds, O Lord. Renew them in our day. In our time, make them known. In wrath, remember mercy. And this is why it's so important to continually recount the good that God has done in our lives in the past. Sometimes we live too much in the moment. We often say, live in the moment. And what that means really is don't be fretting about the past because you've been forgiven. And don't be worried about the future because God will take care of you. He says, be anxious about nothing, but in all things, give thanks. By prayer and petition, present your request to God, and you'll have peace. So live in the moment. But it doesn't mean to forget what's gone on in the past, because the past is very instructive. Don't let it condemn you, but certainly let it instruct you. And Habakkuk has this confidence that we find exhibited in chapter 3 because he recounts that God has been so good to him in the past. And the Lord frequently uses this device. We all know Acts chapter 7. Stephen is about to be stoned by the Sanhedrin, and he gives this fantastic speech, which basically is a short one-chapter history lesson of Abram before he left the land of the Chaldees and became Abraham, up to the time of David. And he goes through the Moses and wandering in the desert in Egypt and the whole 9 yards. And he does that to recount to them all the wonderful things that God has done. Paul, in Acts chapter 13 and other places, he was in Pisidian Antioch at that time, and in presenting his case to the Jews that Jesus was the Messiah, begins by giving a history that they already knew. He repeated to them stuff they knew already. He wasn't touching on obscure historical facts, but just the known history of God, dealing with Israel. Psalms 105 and 106, I just happened to read. Pastor Ray last week said over the Thanksgiving break, why don't you take a minute and read in one sitting 104 to 107, and it turns out Psalms 105 and 106 are very similar to this. They, two in a row, you kind of go, oh, here we go again, you know. But it's the Lord in 2 Psalms in a row giving a history of his dealing with the Jewish people. And the question that it brings up in my heart is I'm reading that, as I'm reading what Habakkuk is saying here, the question that I begin to ask is, what is it that I stand in awe of? What is it that I'm standing in awe of? Am I standing in awe of God because I recount the fantastic things he's done in my life? I think maybe it'd be a great exercise to have a little workshop, perhaps, and get together and learn how to write our own personal psalm. You know, just a little history of what God has done in my life, particularly. Maybe looking back in my family. Maybe your family's been saved for a generation or two or longer. I can look back to my Uncle Mart, you know, my dad's brother, who's gone on to the Lord now, but was saved and had an influence on me years ago. I can look back on this preacher that picked me up on an interstate highway. I was hitchhiking out to Colorado, and this guy picked me up, and this black preacher, this great big long car, and he would get on one entrance and pick up a hitchhiker and preach to him and get off, and then get back on again. And that's what he did. A couple of days a week. He picked up people like me and told them the gospel. I ran into some kids, really. Now that I think about it, I'm more than twice as old as I was then when I was out in Colorado, but I was working out at this tourist trap, slinging hash, doing the breakfast line cook thing, and I told everybody I was a Buddhist. I don't know. Just trying to make conversation. And I'd run into a couple of Buddhists on the way up there, and so I had a little book, and, you know, I was a knothead. But it sure did make for some conversation, and a couple of those people were very concerned and witnessed to me. And see, I could write that down in my own little personal psalm. This is what the Lord did, you know, in my life. And I can think about the times that literally I should have died. I did stupid stuff. I should have been dead. But somehow the Lord knew I was going to get saved. Well, it's not somehow, but it was a mystery to me. He knew I was going to be saved. He had in mind for me today and tomorrow and a life with him in eternity. And I could write those on, oh, Lord, and your hand protected me here and protected me there. And then after you get saved, and your kids and your family, all the stuff that goes on, we forget. But God says, through Paul and through Stephen and through the Psalms and through the prophets, he says, recall your past because it'll put you in awe of me. And so I have to think to myself, what am I in awe of? And usually what I'm in awe of is whatever my attention is focused on. That's the thing that's impressing me at the moment. And you may think, well, I'm not in awe of my troubles. They're just troubling me. Yeah, but the reason that they're troubling me is because it's like, that Nebby guy in the VeggieTales, you know, this great big monstrous, it's like this hulking deal in front of me, and it's got my attention captured. And so I'm not worshiping it, but I'm in awe. I'm awestruck and frightened by it. So what dominates my field of vision? There's an old saying, you know, I can't see the forest for the trees. It's very applicable to us as Christians. Sometimes you can't see the forest. What is the forest? The forest is the big picture. It's God's in control of the universe and in my life, and I've got personal history to back it up. That's the forest. And what do I see? I'm so close to this one tree of the trouble in my life that I can't see the forest because of the tree that's right in front of me. But if I back up and recount what God's done, I see the blessings of God that have rained down, really, in my life. Renew them in our day, he says. In our time, make them known. In wrath, remember mercy. Lord, you did this great stuff, all this wonderful stuff. Do it again, Lord. Lord, I know you can do it. You're just waiting to bless me, Lord. I know that. So what you've done in the past, Lord, repeat that again. Then Habakkuk goes on and gives this highly poetic account of God's deliverance from Egypt. God came down from Teman. Teman means southland, in the south. And Mount Paran is a southern peak near the Sinai Desert. So he came down from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. And then there's a Selah. In the musical, when they turned this into a psalm and a worship song, there would be this pause, this interlude to consider that. He came down from Mount Paran. His glory covered the heavens, and his praise filled the earth. His splendor was like the sunrise. Rays flashed from his hand where his power was hidden. He's going out here to talk about Egypt in a moment. My assumption is here what he's talking about is the judgments against Pharaoh, suddenly flashing out against Pharaoh. Maybe he's talking about Mount Sinai where the lightning flashed around Mount Sinai. Not sure. Plague went before him. Pestilence followed his steps, referring, of course, to the 9 plagues with which he struck Egypt. He stood and shook the earth. He looked and made the nations tremble. The ancient mountains crumbled and the age-old hills collapsed. His ways are eternal. Of course, this is God appearing before Moses on Mount Sinai, accompanied by earthquakes and lightning and smoke. Habakkuk is mindful here of how frequently God interrupted the laws of nature for the benefit of his people. The plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, the pillars of cloud and fire in the desert, Mount Sinai smoking and trembling, and we go on and on and on. And what he's doing here is just exulting in God's mastery over the physical creation. God is bigger than the boogeyman, as they say. You know, he's in charge of the entire created universe. He's bigger than my problem. And his problem, by the way, is bigger than most of my problems. Habakkuk's problem is the Babylonians are going to come in and kill everybody. So he's got a big problem, but he's having confidence in God in the face of it. I saw the tents, verse 7, the tents of Cushan in distress, the dwellings of Midian in anguish. And as the huge multitude moves out of Egypt, the terror of the Israelites falls upon the people that whose lands they travel through, and of course Canaan, where they're traveling to. Exodus chapter 15 tells us the nations will hear and tremble. Anguish will grip the people of Philistia. The chiefs of Edom will be terrified. The leaders of Moab will be seized with trembling. That's all surrounding the land they're going into. And the people of Canaan will melt away. Terror and dread will fall upon them. By the power of your arm, they will be as still as stone until your people pass by, O Lord, until the people you bought pass by. Were you angry with the rivers, O Lord? Verse 8. Was your wrath against the streams? Did you rage against the sea when you rode with your horses and your victorious chariots? You know, God, he's referring to God using, of course, the sea here where he defeated Pharaoh. But God uses water a lot. He turns the Nile to blood, turns all the wells to blood, parts the Red Sea, drowns the Pharaoh's army. He stops up the Jordan. So he's kind of cherry picking a little bit. He's hopping from event to event, not even necessarily in chronological order, just citing magnificent instances of God moving. You uncovered your bow and you called for many arrows. And there's this musical interlude again. Here the prophet now turns from the specific interventions of God in the Exodus, and he recounts God's hand at work in human history. This next reference is to the flood, the great flood. He says, you split the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and writhed. Torrents of water swept by. The deep roared and lifted its waves on high. Sun and moon still in the heavens. Here referring to the victory of Joshua at Gibeon. Sun and moon stood still in the heavens at the glint of your flying arrows, at the lightning of your flashing spear. We know from Joshua chapter 10 that the Lord made the sun stand still. It says the moon stopped until the nation avenged itself on its enemies, as is written in the book of Jashar. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down for about a full day. Verse 12, in wrath you strode through the earth, and in anger you threshed the nations. Then he refers back again. Now he's coming back to the present, in his present time, to Pharaoh and his army. You came out to deliver your people, to save your anointed one. You crushed the leader of the land of wickedness. You stripped him from head to foot. With his own spear you pierced his head. When his warriors stormed out to scatter us, gloating as though about to devour the wretched who were in hiding. And then Pharaoh again, you trampled the sea with your horses, churning the great waters. I heard, and my heart pounded. Now here we find, in the conclusion of his book here, beginning in verse 16 to the end, through I think verse 19, I believe. Yes. Habakkuk ends with exactly the proper attitude. And this is really the core of this book. I heard, and my heart pounded. Heard what? Well, he began chapter 3 with, Lord, I have heard of your fame. And he spends the next 14 verses describing that fame. And then he concludes with, I heard all this, and my heart pounded. My lips quivered at the sound. Decay crept into my bones, and my legs trembled. Doesn't mean he's decaying, but all of a sudden, he's as Isaiah would say, undone, dissolved. He's weakened and trembling before the Lord, contemplating the awesome power that God exercises on behalf of his people. Yet I will wait patiently for the day of calamity to come on the nation invading us. Though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God my Savior. Why? Because the sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to go on the heights. Now, this is not an exact quote, but I think this verse 17, is being paraphrased in the worship song, When No Fruit is on the Vine, I will trust in you, I will trust in you. And here, more than anywhere else, pardon me, is the message of Habakkuk. He discovered the secret to contentedness and peace in the Lord. Though the Lord may have blessed abundantly with good crops and large flocks, they weren't the reason for his joy. And folks, that's the message of Habakkuk. God doesn't say, oh, Habakkuk, what a wonderful prayer. You were praying fervently, and the prayers of a fervent man availeth much. Therefore, I will stay my hand, and the Babylonians won't invade. There won't be destruction. Jeremiah won't have to weep over the destruction of Jerusalem. No. The Babylonians are still coming. And Habakkuk says, even if the fig tree doesn't bud, and there's no fruit on the vine, the olive crop fails, if there's no food in the fields, if the sheep and cattle all die, still I will rejoice in the Lord. Are we content just in Jesus? Not always. I got to tell you, not always. Sometimes I'm just not content. Sometimes I want Jesus for what Jesus will give me. And he's given me a lot. Sue me. He's poured out so much. How can we be blamed for saying, Lord, this is great. Keep on coming. Give me more and more. And when we don't get it, we're unhappy. I guess I question myself, would I be just as grateful? Because, I'm so grateful to God. Most of the time my heart is full of thanksgiving. But you see, he's given me a wonderful family and food on my table and warm clothes and you guys, great fellowship to come to, a job in ministry that I absolutely love to do. Why wouldn't I be grateful? You think of all the things he's given you. Why wouldn't you be grateful? And this whole thing has made me ask the question of myself, how grateful would I be if I was Corrie ten Boom? Would I be saying, what is the quote, that no pit is so deep that God is not deeper still? Would I say that? I hope so. I think maybe I would. I think we would. Because what I've discovered in my life, and perhaps you have in yours, don't you sometimes think, what would happen if this bad thing happened? What would I do if they came and dragged me away? What would I do if disaster occurred? But haven't you found at times in your life when disaster has hit that most frequently what happens is the Lord pours grace out at that moment? And even though you think of yourself as being a wimp and a coward and you don't want any pain, when the thing comes, all of a sudden the grace is there and you find you're able to praise God anyway. And I think that's what will happen. I really do. I hope. I pray that that's the case. Habakkuk, 800 years before it was written, is anticipating Romans chapter 1, verse 25. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worship and serve created things rather than the Creator. You say, how do you connect that to Habakkuk? Because what he's saying is that in spite of all you've given me, I will worship you alone, as opposed to I will worship what you have given me. And all the blessings you've poured out, that's why I love you, Lord, because of all the good stuff you've done. No. The only thing in the Bible that says we love him for really which is appropriate, is because he loved us first. And it even there doesn't mean, therefore, that's your reason for loving him. It's saying, that's just the fact. You couldn't even love him unless he loved you first, so you're without any reason to boast even for that. I have this great love for God. Well, yeah, because he put it there. He loved you first. There's a pattern in Habakkuk's writing that's kind of interesting. In chapter 1, Habakkuk is in a state of despair, at a spiritual and emotional low point. And he says in verse 2 of that chapter, "How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen?" He has no confidence in God and sees his own situation as being very desperate. But in chapter 2, he's going from the lowest of low points. He's made his way up to the watchtower, right? He says, "I will station myself in the watchtower," or perhaps your translation says, "on the ramparts." So he's gone from down here to the top of the wall at least. He's anticipating God's going to answer, so he's roused himself up to hear an answer from God. He's expectant. And now in chapter 3, he has accepted God's reasoning. He's submitted his own reasoning to God. And he declares, "I'm like a deer on the heights." Chapter 1, ugh. Chapter 2, "Okay, Lord, you have something to say?" Chapter 3, "Okay, Lord, you're right." And he's like a deer on the heights. And what accounts for that? Between depression and exaltation, what has changed? And the one thing we know hasn't changed is the external circumstances. But Habakkuk has made a decision to trust God as sovereign of his life. Not just that, not just his own life, but sovereign over the future of Israel, and he's sovereign over the earth and the entire universe through what he's telling us here, his working creation. So I think there's several principles in Habakkuk, just to close with a short recap. First of all, God is approachable. What I love about this book, maybe the most, same thing I love about Asaph. And who is it? Elam the Hithilite or something like that. Whoever wrote Psalm 83 or 4 comes and complains and just, basically beating up on God for how unfair he is. Job. What I like about these guys is what it tells us is that when we're angry with God or anxious or depressed, he allows us to complain. He doesn't condemn us because we go before him in distress and worry and anxiety. And Lord, how could you and why don't you? He doesn't put us on the shelf. He doesn't condemn us for it. He's big enough. God's a big enough God. He can take it. I love that about him. I'm not always like that. Come and complain to me. I might just blow you off. And even if I'm really nice and sweet and smile, I'm thinking to myself, okay, that's the last time I ask you to do anything, Maury. Thank you very much. That's the way we are. We got, two things going on. God's not like that. God is just, I've saved you. I love you. I want to use you. So times are tough. Come and tell me. Lay your burdens on me. Number 2, God answers prayer, but not necessarily in expected methods or fashions that we lay before him. His answer may be, and I found anyway, usually is so radically different than what I'm asking for that I don't necessarily recognize his answer until later. And then I look back a year or two and I go, oh, well, I guess you're God. Things worked out okay, but that's not what I expected. God answers prayer, but he answers it in his way. Number 3, God's timing is his province alone. He told us the prophecy will come and not be delayed in chapter 2, the beginning of chapter 2. His will may not be immediately apparent, but it is not being delayed. That's our timing. He's right on schedule. And number 4, what we talked about today, that our contentedness should not, I was going to say is not, but it's actually should not be dependent on external circumstances, but on our internal compass. Where is my internal compass pointed? Is it pointed at the problems? Is that where my focus is, on the big tree in front of me? Or is it pointed toward God? That which predominantly captures my attention. I'm not saying you can just stop thinking about stuff. It's like, I will not think about a purple gorilla. I will not think about a purple gorilla. That's all you can think about sometimes. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that instead of trying not to think about all the stuff that's going on, why not just focus on Jesus? It's so much easier just to focus on the Lord and the good stuff he's done, recounting what he's done in my life. And that's what will determine my outlook. Like Habakkuk, my eyes will go from down here to up here, like a deer on the heights. So he closes with, for the director of music, on my stringed instruments. These, by the way, were added later. More than likely, this wasn't written as a song, just this wildly exuberant praise to God that was recognized as very psalm-like. And so the Selahs and the Shigayanoth and the stringed instruments were added at a later time for temple worship, more than likely. So there we have the book of Habakkuk. And next week, we will start in Zephaniah.